depicted England and British society life at a very specific moment. They became great friends from that moment on. Paul was invited to Blenheim, where he started painting with Churchill. What they were actually putting on the canvas and the paper were what they liked to talk about.
We're here in Pall Mall outside of Dreweatts, and we're in for a real treat because we're going to be meeting a woman called Anne Singer to discuss the upcoming sale of Dru Montagu's collection of Paul Maze pastels and paintings. And you had an extraordinary relationship with Paul Maze because you met him through Minnie and Dru Montagu. And you wrote a book, and you wrote a book about his extraordinary work. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that with you.
Well, Paul Maze was introduced to me by Dru Montagu, who is a great friend of my family.
Dru asked you to write the book on Paul. How old was Paul? Because Paul had a very long life, and
he was 90 years old.
And he captivated you.
He was fascinating. He had the energy and the enthusiasm of a 40-year-old man.
Tell me why you have sort of nicknamed him the Lost Impressionist. That was the title of your book.
Well, I found that the subjects that he used, that he liked to work in, were separated into two parts. The outside, which is very impressionist, and
why is that very impressionist?
Because the impressionist, the expression came from when it was the catching of an instant of light that was pleasing to the eye of the painter at that moment and just at that moment. And for Paul, it was terribly important to catch it as quickly as possible because, once you started a pastel, you can't really go back to it because you can't add many layers.
Where did he study?
It was a period of his life where he really enjoyed himself because he was amongst all the best French artists. He met Monet. This was a really enriching time of his life. And then from there, he started his own style, which was very much due to the fact that he was such a talented pastelist. Well, the pastels were like an extension of his fingers, and I used to love watch him use the pastels. And I asked him to teach me, because I was at the art école, but I'd never used pastels. And I asked him if he would teach me how to use a pastel, and I thought it was incredibly difficult.
So, Anne, tell me, where did you meet him in France? Did you meet him in England? Where did you meet him?
I met him with Dru and Minnie Montagu in their house, and he became a feature in the British aristocracy. This was the thing about Paul, is that they loved him and his art. I remember meeting the Duke of Buccleuch, who came to his house for lunch, who was fascinated by Paul and absolutely adored him. He really embedded himself in British life. The wonderful thing about Paul is that he depicted England and British society life at a very specific moment.
Your book on Paul was published in 1983, which was after Paul had died.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been published if it hadn't been for Lawrence Rockefeller. Tell me the link of, because you've talked about Paul and the British society, post-war British society, but one also realizes that he was also loved by that transatlantic, sophisticated American society.
I met Lawrence Rockefeller when I was having lunch at one of the days that I was working at the cottage with Paul and Jessie. And Lawrence Rockefeller was very interested by what I was doing there. And so I explained to him that I was trying to write a book about Paul. Lawrence was really interested by the fact that I wanted to write this book. And he said to me, when you have finished your book and you're ready to publish it, you call me because I would like to sponsor it.
Tell me, why do you think the Americans fell in love with his work as well? Because it was such a quick...
Well, first of all, he was introduced to America because Lawrence Rockefeller invited him to New York, and he invited him also to various country places and introduced him to his friends who were also very rich Americans who I think fell in love with Paul Maze because it was impossible not to fall in love with him. And also they liked the way he worked because they had never seen that kind of pastel before.
2 years ago, there was a retrospective exhibition on Maze and Churchill. If I'm not mistaken, Churchill met Maze in the trenches, and it actually was the First World War, so their friendship was decades long.
Yes, it stemmed from that period where Paul was in the French army, but he was asked to be a liaison officer between the French army and the British army, and that's when he met Winston Churchill. They became great friends from that moment on. When they went back to England, Paul was invited to Blenheim, where he started painting with Churchill. But there was an extraordinary moment where they painted in a beautiful castle called Saint-Georges Motel, which had a mill and water flowing through it. It was a very romantic place, and the two of them were painting side by side. When the phone rang, somebody called him from the house, and he left. And when he came back, he said to Paul, "My friend, we have to pack up our bags. The war started. Now we have to go."
Where was Paul during the Second World War? Was he in France or was he in England?
He was in England. They left Saint-Georges Motel, this place that they loved, and he went back to England to his wife. So he was too old to go into the army.
This friendship with Churchill is quite interesting because Churchill's medium was oil, Paul's was pastel. Tell me a little bit about how you see these two.
So the thing is that they were painting side by side, literally side by side. There are pictures of the two of them sitting next to each other. And you can imagine them discussing really what they were trying to capture and what they wanted to put on their canvas or their paper. But they like to talk about it. They really like discussing it. They were, a bit like two fishermen who go fishing, and they like to talk about the fish that they're going to catch. But what they were actually putting on the canvas and the paper were what they like to talk about.
And thank you. This has been the most fascinating insight in a very special artist that you have the privilege of knowing.
Well, thank you, because it gave me great pleasure to go back to all these memories.